I want it out. I want all of it out. I can't. Straight away. Okay. This is just a warm-up one. Don't even stress about it. Okay. I want it out of my head. Out! All of it out! I'm phoning it in. I want it out of my head. Out! All of it out! There's so much tangled, knotted mess in there. A million ideas, and they're all interwoven and looping and... Is there anything more insufferable than writing about writing? This video was going to be about creative block. It is now something else entirely. I recently stumbled upon something I wrote at the end of 2022, at a time when I was starting to try to recover myself as a creative. I thought it would make a wonderful monologue, and I figured that would be a nice little project to knock out over a weekend while I work on more time-intensive projects around my time-intensive full-time job. Here's how that video was going to go. I was going to do a short introduction where I talk about being a recovering gifted kid and my nearly decade-long creative block. I would wax lyrical about art, I would talk a little about Julia Cameron and the artist's way, then roll the monologue. You would watch me, amateur actor that I am, express my past self's doubts, wondering if I'm ever going to be able to make anything good, wondering if there's something wrong with me. But we, the audience, can see that actually it's a lovely piece of writing and I've been making good art all along. Haha, isn't that ironic? End on a moment of sustained eye contact to drive home the emotional catharsis. I'd play you out with a thematically relevant song. Job done. The lesson boils down to keep producing even if you think it's bad. It's a bit of a long way round to get to such a simple point, but the piece is very raw and emotionally charged, and a decent enough performance could carry the video through. That was the plan, and I think that would have been a fine video. A little self-indulgent, but solid enough and pleasingly artsy, but it didn't work out. Because of Dan Olson. I'm trying to shoot a monologue today, or technically it's a soliloquy. I've just done some test footage for this soliloquy, and there is nothing more humiliating than shooting a soliloquy on camera instead of performing it in front of an audience. Like, who are you talking to? A few days before I was due to shoot the monologue, while I was starting to work on memorizing the thing, Dan Olson, also known as Folding Ideas, released I Don't Know James Rolfe. The experience of watching it is a little difficult to describe. It is, in large part, standard video essay fare, running down the career and legacy of James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd. It is also something else entirely. It's a video that I expect future art historians will look at as a marker for the beginning of the YouTube high renaissance, an era where the groundwork of technique and convention laid in the previous few decades reached saturation levels. It is very much of YouTube, for YouTube, and it is YouTube as a medium at its best. If you haven't seen it, I cannot recommend it enough. I have not been at this game very long. At time of writing, a little over 6 months. I do feel strongly that this is what I am meant to do, what I am built for, but at the same time, I am aware that I am a beginner. I do not claim to know what it means to be a YouTuber, but still, when I saw this,
Do you have any idea how hard it is to get mad on camera? There's a whole instinct of embarrassment, of self-preservation that you need to bury in order to sit alone in a room and howl at full volume for an audience that doesn't even exist. They can't see you, the real you, sitting on the floor of your basement, debasing yourself for them. They're just phantasms off in the future that are going to consume some ghost of you, spewed out at them by their phones as a crass homunculus of photons and digital audio.
I cannot begin to tell you what that did to me. So it comes time to shoot. I make my cute little set with the traditional pile of thematically relevant books, and I borrow a microphone from a friend. I take some test footage. I watch it back, and I am humiliated. It's not a terrible performance. It is identifiably amateurish, but it is better than you might expect for someone with no formal training. And it is also humiliating. Inherently. It is humiliating on the face of it to pour your heart and soul into something. Doubly humiliating if it's bad, and triply humiliating if it's mediocre. And then straight after watching back this humiliating display, I have to face my extremely creative friends for some scheduled collaboration. And they all have actual skills and experience where I only have stubbornness and enthusiasm. Hey, what's up, guys? I know you watch these videos. Yes, this is why I was bringing a kind of miserable vibe to that Zoom call. The most humiliating part is that I chose this humiliation for myself. And I continued to choose it. Because I got up the next day and tried again. It took 3 days to get a passable performance. Multiple times I shot the whole thing out of focus or without recording the audio. It was, I'll be honest, not fun for me. And for that entire time, I have this phrase echoing around my head. Crass homunculus of photons, crass homunculus of photons. I became aware that this video could not be a feel-good little piece about how your work is probably not even that bad and you should just keep making things even if you hate it. This video is about what you have to be willing to do. I don't think I ever want to be the sort of person who makes art about how making art is hard. At least, not in the way a beginner artist does it. There are much more interesting ideas in the world. Just at this second, though, I can't seem to think of a single one. The Artist's Way, A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity, was written by Julia Cameron and first officially published in 1992, although she'd been selling photocopies for some time beforehand. A full 30 years after publication, a copy found its way into my hands right at the time I was working through a creative block that had lasted about 8 years. Julia Cameron would call this synchronicity. If you are creative in any way, you've probably at least heard of the book, if not read it yourself. It's structured as a 12-week creativity recovery program, and the way it runs parallel to many kinds of addiction recovery program is almost certainly intentional. In her 2006 memoir, Floor Sample, she describes the trajectory of her life thusly. She was a good Catholic girl from the suburbs of Chicago with a passion for writing. At some point as an adult, she discovers the liberating powers of alcohol and shortly thereafter, cocaine. She has a turbulent and short-lived marriage with Martin Scorsese, yes, that Martin Scorsese. She is hospitalized for a nervous breakdown and from there begins her recovery, from both addiction and the havoc that addiction had wreaked on her creative practice. These experiences inform both the shape and the substance of The Artist's Way. I read the book, front to back, and found it very helpful. She's a very spirited writer with a way of spurring you into hope and excitement and action in a way that most self-help authors don't manage half as well. I never did work my way through the 12-week program in the way that she intended, Not because I didn't see the value, but because I was actually a few steps ahead of her. The book also runs parallel to trauma recovery programs, and I was already neck deep in that process. The first week, for instance, is dedicated to regaining a sense of safety, which the trauma girlies will recognize as the first of 3 phases of trauma treatment: safety and stabilization. Trauma treatment. Trauma treatment. Fun. To put it another way, the artist's way pairs very nicely with the body keeps the score. If I had to distill the book down, I would pull out the following major ideas. 1. Art is God. 2. The morning pages. And 3. You do not have to suffer to be an artist. Let's take them one at a time. Firstly, art is God. The idea is, essentially, that you are a channel through which the act of creation moves. Your creativity does not come from you. It is God working through you, and all you have to do is make sure you sit down to work. You take care of the quantity, God takes care of the quality. The actual shape of this belief is a little complicated, very flexible, and ultimately not that important on its own. Cameron makes this clear in the first 2 pages. Do not call it God unless that is comfortable for you. There seems to be no need to name it unless that name is a useful shorthand for what you experience. Do not pretend to believe when you do not. If you remain forever an atheist, agnostic, so be it. You will still be able to experience an altered life through working with these principles. An altered life. So, what you call it and whether or not you believe it is not what's important. What's important is what this belief allows you to do. The belief that you are just a channel for creative energy exists in opposition to the myth of genius, the idea that artists are born uniquely gifted with special important brains that think the best thoughts because they're just so smart. It's a kind of essentialism that says if you make something good and clever and beautiful, it must be because you are essentially good and clever and beautiful. The quality of your work reflects the quality of your soul. The unstated corollary of this is that if you make something bad, you are automatically ejected from the pool of potential geniuses. Bad work means there's something essentially wrong with you. You have a bad soul. With this in mind, creative block becomes a reasonable form of self-defense. If there is something essentially wrong with you, it would be better not to know. But if you're just a conduit for creativity, if it has nothing to do with you, if you take care of the quantity and God takes care of the quality, when you make something bad, that doesn't say anything about you at all. You can imagine how liberating this is. It frees you up to simply try. Because, of course, the myth of genius is a myth. Nobody is born a genius, and the first step at being good at something is being willing to be bad at it. How I feel about all this in a spiritual sense is a topic for a whole other video, please subscribe, but suffice it to say, this does align with my experiences. Cameron talks about writing as a kind of transcription. You listen, and you put down what you hear. I can tell you that when I sit down to write, it feels like a miracle when words come out. I don't really know where they're coming from, and my job feels much more like curation than creation. And as a recovering gifted kid, being able to make bad art without it shattering my entire identity was an essential first step to being able to make good art. Next up, the morning pages. You've probably heard about the morning pages. First thing in the morning, you get up, and before you've even looked at your phone, you write 3 pages of whatever comes to your head by hand, please and thank you. Cameron could not be more firm about the instrumentality of the morning pages. She swears by them, up, down, side to side, all the other directions.
Morning pages. I've been doing morning pages a long time. Morning pages make us expand. They move us in directions of needed growth. They are like poking a little teeny whisk broom into the corners of your consciousness and sweeping the debris into the center of the room where you can deal with it.
I have used the morning pages, and I admit they are very good at what they do. I do have one little bone to pick with them, though. They serve a few functions, but I think the main thing that the morning pages are doing is teaching you to notice and subsequently tolerate your own thoughts. I agree that this is absolutely essential. Your thoughts are where your ideas are. You need to be aware of them, willing to engage with them, but not so invested that you become trapped in rumination or dysregulated by negative self-talk. It is not an easy task. Your thoughts are where your ideas are, but then there's also everything else. I suspect that what most people find if they tune into their thoughts long enough is a tape playing one sentence on loop over and over again. There is something wrong with me. And there is no thought more disagreeable to feeling safe in your own head than that. The bone I have to pick is that I find Cameron a little dogmatic on the subject for my tastes. She swears by the pages, but the same effect can be achieved any number of ways. What we're really talking about at the core is mindfulness. You could walk in nature, you could swim laps, you could meditate, you could potter around your garden. You can actually practice mindfulness at any time. And having a wide variety of tools to choose from is always going to be better than one. And last but not least, you do not have to suffer to be an artist. This is an important theme running through the book, and it honestly rubs me the wrong way. It's the only real disagreement I have with Cameron. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand what she means by this. She's referring to another myth, the myth of the tortured artist. We have this cultural understanding of artists as tragic figures who sacrifice themselves, mind, body, and soul for their art. What made Vincent van Gogh, Ernest Hemingway, and Sylvia Plath great artists? Well, what do they have in common? They were poor, misunderstood, crazy, alcoholic, emotionally unstable, isolated, tormented geniuses who killed themselves. And therefore they made great art. So the narrative goes. It's a very compelling narrative, but lived experience as a mentally ill creative will reveal the truth of the matter, which is that tortured artists create in spite of their tragedy, not because of it. The tragedy is entirely unnecessary, and in fact, a pretty big hindrance. And Cameron, of course, is coming from her own experience here. She tried the tortured artist thing and found that she could not sustain it. I'm about to read the quote right now, and I'm going to say carotid artery, as though my ass isn't watching House MD 24/7 and know perfectly well that it's pronounced carotid. So, just be on the lookout for that. Creative, yes, but in spurts, like blood from a severed carotid artery. A decade of writing and all I knew was how to make these headlong dashes and hurl myself against all odds at the wall of whatever I was writing. If creativity was spiritual in any sense, it was only in its resemblance to a crucifixion. I fell upon the thorns of prose. I bled. If I could have continued writing the old painful way, I would certainly still be doing it. Very powerful, very emotive language. And as a former Catholic girl myself, I appreciate the religious imagery. I'm a bit of a heretic. Sue me. She is right to say that this way of working, that falling upon the thorns of prose, is not a good way to live, and that there is no need for it. You can live a well-balanced life and be an incredible artist. And in fact, you must, because you have to be able to tolerate quite a bit of suffering. Because art, I am sorry to say, does require suffering. It does have a cost. When will I know that I've made something? This is a kind of making something, sure, but when will I know that I've made something for someone? I won't even want to reread this when it's done. I don't know what it's saying, and I don't think anyone else would either. I just have to get it out. I have to get it all out. I have made, by my count, 2 good videos to date. It's Never Enough and Then You Die, and Woman vs. Tree. Don't get me wrong, I have others that I think are worthwhile, and I hope they one day find their audience, but those 2 are good with a capital G. They performed pretty well for my channel's size, and I honestly knew they would. I knew they would because they cost me something. Making a good video, for me, feels like pulling a knife out of my stomach. It's a huge relief at first. I mean, a foreign body was embedded inside me, and I've finally managed to remove it. But then that rush of relief fades away, and I realize that I'm leaking. I am losing something of me. The boundary between me and the rest of the world is punctured, and I can no longer contain myself. My inside is out. That's the cost. That's what you have to be willing to do. You don't know me, but you know something of me, and it's more than you'd find out from meeting me a handful of times. You are in my bedroom right now. 4 people I know in real life have seen my bedroom, and here you are, a perfect stranger, in my bedroom. And the crazy part is that I invited you into it. It is profoundly exposing, profoundly vulnerable, and leaves me feeling like a glass bottle for several days afterwards, completely emptied out and prone to shattering if handled too roughly. It takes me several days to feel fully myself again, and in that time I have to care for myself as though I'm a Victorian waif who's come down with consumption. And who is it for? Who am I doing all this for? You? I am afraid that I am not built to write. If I am built to write, why can't I feel it? And then, why do I feel it so strongly? Both at the same time, like always, like everything. Dialectics I can't synthesize. I want to live, I want to die. I want to create, I have nothing to say. I have connections, I am isolated. Messy, all the time. Why can it come so easily to some, but not to me? In What is Literature, Jean-Paul Sartre spends a great deal of time talking about the relationship between the writer and the reader. They are, in his view, entirely dependent on one another. The novel cannot exist without the reader, and the reading cannot exist without the novel. Therefore, like all relationships, there must be a foundation of trust between them. The reader, by reading, agrees to trust that the writer is writing in good faith, and the writer, by writing, is agreeing to trust that the reader is reading in good faith. Thus, reading is a pact of generosity between author and reader. Each one trusts the other. Each one counts on the other, demands of the other as much as he demands of himself. For this confidence is itself generosity. When you make art, you are giving something of yourself away. You do not control how the people who receive it are going to treat it, and you never get it back. I am giving something of myself to you. I cannot control how you are going to treat it, and I will never get it back. It is a leap of faith. Sartre talks about what happens when writing is ungenerous. He gives an account of Drew La Rochelle. French people do not start with me. A French writer turned Nazi collaborator and propagandist during the Nazis' occupation of northern France. The first few months he reprimanded, rebuked, and lectured his countrymen. No one answered him because no one was free to do so. He became irritated. He no longer felt his readers. He became more insistent, but no sign appeared to prove that he had been understood. No sign of hatred, nor of anger either. Nothing. Finally, he kept still, gagged by the silence of others. In short, an ungenerous writer will find themselves without a reader, and because they are dependent on each other, without a reader, the writer cannot exist. The writer must give their work as a gift, or else face extinction. It's life or death shit. As an aside, even without, the genocide and that would be reason enough for me to oppose fascism. As a wise band once said, the fascists have their outfits, but the communists have the music. Sartre does talk about the possibility of an inattentive reader, and he also dunks on his critics pretty hard a couple of times, but he doesn't talk about the ungenerous reader. And I don't really understand why, because I can think about very little else. I hate this thing that I am, if you could call it a thing. It is broken, it doesn't work, it's not fit for purpose. It's cobbled together out of disparate parts, nothing aligning, all the tubes leak, all the gears jam. Why is my brain full of fuzz? When you make things, I think it is natural and necessary to conjure up a vision of the ungenerous reader inside your own head. In order to get yourself across, you need to have at least some projected sense of how someone who is not you might understand you. The person with no vision of the ungenerous reader is not going to notice when some element of the work is failing to carry its intended meaning. On the other hand, I probably think about the ungenerous reader more than is helpful. It is in the eyes of the ungenerous reader that I am humiliated, where I see myself reflected back as a crass homunculus of photons. The ungenerous reader pulls out and reveals to me every insecurity, every part of myself that I would prefer wasn't so, and everything I hope I am not. In order to create, I have to face the ungenerous reader, which means facing myself. That is the cost. That is what you have to be willing to do. People told me I was smart a long time ago. I think that's true. I think that's still true. There's something in there cast in gold and bronze. A beautiful, shining thing that I can't get to without slicing my hand on the brambles. A sparkle. I want to bring it out. Something I've noticed is that stand-up comedians know the ungenerous reader intimately. That makes sense. Their ungenerous reader is often sitting in the front row and shouting at them. I think a lot lately about one of James Acaster's Netflix specials from the Repertoire series, Reset. He opens with a bit about how the audience is exactly who he was hoping to see. They're exactly the right people, and they're even sat in exactly the right order. It's his perfect audience.
Good, great to see you. I hoped it'd be you. I did. On the way here, I said out loud, hope it's them. I actually hope it's you every gig. I hope that's not too gushy early doors.
A little later, he calls on a member of that audience, Andrew, and talks about how Andrew has done some really bad gigs, and it becomes increasingly obvious what's going on.
And the more gigs you got, the more gigs you got offered. And now it's like 10 years down the line. It wasn't the plan, but it's your job, isn't it, Andrew? You're doing it pretty much every night of the year. And for the most part, you love it. Best job you've ever had. But every now and again, and don't take this badly, but every now and again, when you're not playing to a lovely crowd in Notting Hill, oh, you die on your ass, don't you? Die so bad, sometimes more than one day in a row, a week. Do you remember that time you died every single night for a month? You should do. It was this year. Do you remember that?
I come back to this special again and again. It reveals the game you have to play when you're making art. Yes, you have this internalized vision of the ungenerous reader, but that's not who you're making it for. You've also got the generous reader in there. And whenever you make something, you're imagining it in their hands. Your perfect audience. You never stop thinking of them.
You can't focus on bad shows forever, bad crowds, right? That's why you spend most of your time thinking about the perfect audience. You can't wait to see them.
And sometimes it does end up in their hands. And you can tell that it's them. And that feeling is indescribable. When you make something, you are repaying a debt for something you have already been given. You are repaying your debt to art, every show, movie, book, song, photograph, painting, and poem that has ever made you feel something. You are repaying the debt you owe for being kept in contact with your soul, with that thing that's bigger than the human body. You are in service to art. And you are going to be anxious, and it's going to demand a lot from you, and you will be required to tolerate a lot of unpleasant emotions. You are always going to fear that you aren't good enough, fear that you're not reaching anyone, fear that there's something wrong with you. You're often going to hate the things you make for the parts of you they reveal. You're going to feel uncertain. You're going to feel like an open wound. And every now and then, someone will offer you something. They will say, "Thank you for making this. It matters to me." And you will know that they have offered it to you freely. And you will know that you're doing the thing that you're built for. What is that thing? That sparkle? Would people recognize it if I could show it to them? Would they know what to do with it, how to treat it? Could I explain it to them? Could it make people feel something? Could it make them cry? Could it help them understand their own hidden, shining thing? Can I touch a person's soul? I hope so. Let's call it a wrap for the second time tonight.
Do you feel me? Is that relatable? Are these concepts scalable for the market? Should I hate it and make me saleable? Make my work sustainable? Or fuck it, 'cause I feel it.
I'm an artist, see? I'm sort of giving April Ludgate a little bit, but if she was on Vivance.